interesting part is my Ramona Health Media, where I already have like a drug app where it translates any new drugs into any language. So this drug could translate English, the name of the English drug into Spanish, Korean, Chinese, Malay, or whatever. I'm working with the developer and putting that on the iPhone. So that's something that I think would be interesting, because I want to keep up with time. And everything's moving online. There's a lot of media application and things like that. So I just think that there's a lot of potential for pharmacy in pharmacy business. I think that's my time. So if you have any question, if you like to find out more, and I certainly welcome any input from any of you. If you have any ideas how I could explain my business, or you have any experience in any of these areas, let me know. Love to talk to you. Thank you, Gilda.
Thank you, Jesse. I know I sent you an email introducing you to somebody in the club that I think would be a good partner for you. But we appreciate that. I don't know where you went. Okay.
Thank you, Jesse. Okay, do we have any more announcements? Just raise your hand. Okay, great. All right, next week for our program, our guest speaker will be Michael Campbell. His topic is treating area patients with the coronavirus. And so special thanks to Claudia Tala and the programs committee for arranging that program. Thank you. Okay, we are now going to hand over the meeting to Linda to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, it's my pleasure to be able to introduce Evans Lam, who is our speaker today. He is a Senior Vice President of Investments and a Senior Portfolio Manager of the, of the Lam Group, the UBS Financial Services Incorporated in Pasadena. And previously he was a Senior Vice President and Wealth Management Advisor at Smith Barney. So Evans began his wealth advisory and portfolio management career in 1991, and over the past 2 decades has successfully helped clients manage their wealth throughout several challenging market cycles. And so he's going to be speaking about Hong Kong, which is also undergoing some very challenging economic cycles right now. So Evans is a renowned expert and has advised the State Council of China on monetary reform. So today, Evans has said that he's gonna just keep his briefing short so that people can ask questions, but he'll talk about Hong Kong's economic structure pre-1997, the Chinese economic policies on Hong Kong after the return to China, current challenges and solutions offered by China, the effectiveness of the Chinese stimulus, and the future of Hong Kong and the most recent updates. So Evans, take it away. Evans, you still there?
Evans, can you go off of mute?
Hello, good afternoon again. Thank you for the kind invitations. Just for the record, I've been a managing director of UBS for the last 5 years already. So that's been an old record. And also added to my credentials related to Hong Kong, that's important is that I serve as a financial advisor on a monetary reform for China in 2002 at the invitation of the then Premier Zhu Rongji. I spent 3 days at Zhongnanhai, and then 1 day with the then mayor of Shanghai, and basically get a lot of insights. So a lot of the monetary reform in China has my footprint on it. And also related to Hong Kong in 1998, I advised the then the Hong Kong Monetary Authority on some kind of reform on the China's mortgage, on the Hong Kong's mortgage. At that time, 1998, after the return, Hong Kong didn't have any long-term mortgage. We take a 30 years mortgage for granted. But at that time, Hong Kong only have a 5 to 10 years type of term of mortgage. So I've been advising them how to set up something like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. So why I have to touch on all this, and why I also want to touch on the current outlook of Chinese economy before I even talk about Hong Kong. After the COVID-19, I firmly believe that China will be the country that will be moving towards recovery the fastest in the world, okay? Because again, whether you like it or you don't like it, I don't like it. I don't want to be, my activities every day being tracked by so-called link. They call it the medical link, okay? And so that whoever I talk to anyone or I spend time where the government know about, and that is a complete invasion of my privacy, but it works very well in China in terms of, helping them to recover from the pandemics. So because of that advantage or disadvantage, again, depending how you look at it, China will be very fast recovering from this COVID-19. Not only that, they have the vaccine coming, but the tracking system. Now, then we go back to Hong Kong. Hong Kong, a lot of people always consider Hong Kong like Taiwan, and it's not, okay? Taiwan has always been an independent country. You can call it Republic of China, you can call it Taiwan, you can call it anything, okay? But it is an independent country. It has its own constitutions, its military, and also its financial system, its monetary systems. Hong Kong always has to rely on China, on the natural resources, on trade and everything. That did not change before 1997 or after 1997. So a lot of people kind of get confused that Hong Kong, can be economically independent, okay? Not politically, but economically independent from China, and that's a wishy-washy. And so what Hong Kong, the problem actually, and I am very, very pessimistic about the future of Hong Kong. And if you look at, the article on the Fortune, 1997, the death of Hong Kong, I did not agree at that time. But now I'm saying that, if I have to publish an article, I would call it the death of Hong Kong. And why I'm so pessimistic about the Hong Kong's future. Now you look at after 1997, there's a few mistakes the Chinese government and the Hong Kong government collectively have done. First, under the first chief executive, Mr. Tung, he wanted to reform the housing. He wanted to build 85,000 a year public housing to basically help out the housing shortage in Hong Kong and give a lot of affordable housing. But that in strong contradictions to the economic interest, financial interest of the real estate tycoon. We call it the four major families. And because of that, he has to cancel, he has to resign because, he has too much pain on his legs. And since then, basically the Hong Kong economy has been basically taken hostage by the real estate tycoons. And that is why the young people, the millennials, and everyone are so upset because there's no way, if you have a job in Hong Kong, there's no way you can ever buy 300 square feet because a 300 square feet condo right now, in a reasonable locations, you're talking about $1 million US, at least 800,000 US. That's a 300 square feet condo, okay? So, and because of these issues, so because at that time, the Chinese government want to stabilize Hong Kong, and they have to rely on the economic influence of these real estate tycoons and those capitalists. So that is the major economic mistakes. They always complain that Hong Kong have no land, which is incorrect. Hong Kong does have a lot of land. don't let anyone fool you into that. For example, after 1997, the whole Kai Tak International Airport, there's a big piece of land. They didn't do anything for years. How many house, apartments you can build just at the former Kai Tak house? Not forget about the other lands that are available. So I don't want to get into that, but that is really the major issue is that for the younger generation, they find that they don't have any opportunities, okay? Not even opportunities, you know, to own a home. Now, then after the 1997, also there's a major problem is in the economic, on the educations. Because even when we were under the British colony, we studied Chinese history, we studied Chinese language, and then of course I also study Chinese literature as well. So I am very Chinese, very, very Chinese, okay? I have my deep cultural root in China, in Chinese. But then the younger generation, because I have a lot of students, I talk to each and every one of them. They really do not know anything about Chinese history. I'm talking about the scholars, the cream of the crop, the top 1% of the young men and women. They have no idea about the history, how China get evolved. So what they see is a lot of mishap that is done, or damage, or lack of democracy that are done by the Communist Party. So that is really the problem. When you have that economic disparity, and also the education system, basically, not only that they don't teach them one system, one country, two system, but essential part of Chinese history, why you are Chinese. No, we are not Chinese. And everyone that I talk to, 90% of the young men and women between age 16 to 30, 90% of them are against the Chinese government or the Communist Party. Now, this is becoming a major, major economic problem. Because if you look at it, Hong Kong can survive on two things. A large support, whether you like it or not, the huge support from China economically, not to mention the water and everything. In 1998, under the Asian financial crisis, I was an advisor at that time. And 1997, 98, George Soros of the world attacked the Hong Kong dollars, okay, attacked the pound. The Chinese government essentially put behind their $2-3 trillion of foreign exchange reserve to protect, to work with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority to protect the integrity of the Hong Kong dollars. So Hong Kong did survive the Asian financial crisis. Now, without China, I don't think Hong Kong would survive, okay? Even not up to as early as 1998. And then at 2003, the SARS, okay? The Hong Kong suffered the worst recessions. The housing price collapse, you know, chopped in half, essentially. And then what the Chinese government did was the 自由行, you know, freedom to travel to Hong Kong, started with Shenzhen, started with a few major cities, and then a few years, basically, almost like all the major city and major, territory, they don't need a visa. And that basically saved Hong Kong because it pumps so much money in terms of tourism, in terms of shopping, in terms of consumer spending. It really, saved Hong Kong in 2003. So right now, for the last 10 years, okay, China has been doing all kinds of policy to make Hong Kong prosper. So you may say that, oh, today I get paid by the Communist Party to something nice about China. I'm just telling you the economic reality, okay? But unfortunately, this generation, they did not see it. They think that they can be Taiwan, but Hong Kong can never be a Taiwan, okay? And I said it right on. So that is the reason to disconnect this is why my pessimistic views coming into the picture. Because if Hong Kong did not connect, do not connect now well with China, we lost so many opportunities. Just think about the current US-China trade war. And then US is asking a lot of Chinese companies to delist, including the Alibaba of the world, okay? And where are they going back to? They're going back to Hong Kong for listing, okay? So Alibaba original cancel an IPO, the largest secondary offering in Hong Kong a year ago, 5 months ago. And then at the request of the central government, they did it. They did it. They raised $25 billion in the Hong Kong secondary offering. So all these are Chinese parents trying to help Hong Kong. Why I mentioned the Shanghai mayor in 2002. At that time, the mayor and the party secretary were Chen Liangyu. Mayor Chen, of course, later was arrested, recently get released for corruption. But he was a very, very smart man. And he personally talked to me in this way. He said, at that time, he was the mayor of Shanghai. He said, I wish Shanghai is in the same level of Hong Kong in the eyes of our leaders. Whatever Hong Kong needs, the central government will provide. Whatever Hong Kong doesn't need, have not thought about, is going to be created and provided by the central government. Now that is from the mayor of Shanghai. So again, I stick with the economic policy. So I'm not saying that, you know, whether Hong Kong should go for democracy and everything. It just, whatever we are looking at right now, Hong Kong's future, economic future, can only be a closer tie to China. Can that be done that way? Are the current generation ready? I don't think so. I recently talked to one of the graduates who is making a decision from your Rochester, going back to Hong Kong or working in the US. Very talented young man. And I told him that in your field, probably, you know, you will find more opportunity, you know, in China and Hong Kong. He is in digital media. And you know that the digital media is really way beyond our imagination. I say, if you're in digital media, you should go back to Hong Kong. You should not stay here in the US. But at the end of the day, I also told him that I know that you are against the Hong Kong government, you are against the communist government, you are against, you know, all the policy of China. So you better not go back because you will be arrested anyway. So there's not much of a future for you unless you really seriously believe that the China is the parent of Hong Kong and the parents are trying to take care of Hong Kong. I don't think you can accept this conclusion. So please stay in the US. Do not go back to Hong Kong. So that wrap up my, my formal presentation, and then we open up for more discussions.
Thank you, Dr. Lambs. That's quite a discussion. Do we have some questions for Dr. Lambs? JP, please unmute yourself.
Hey, Dr. Lam, I have a question. You mentioned an interesting fact, which I was not too aware of, which was the lack of Chinese culture in the young generation in Hong Kong. Could you compare that to the similar situation, or is it similar to what we see in Singapore today, where the younger generation have struggling, you know, trying to learn Mandarin, and they don't seem to be well integrated in the Chinese culture as, so is it comparable or is it completely different?
Well, it's very different. Well, it's very similar and yet very different. Yes, I recently visited to Singapore and granted degrees for your Rochester on behalf of your Rochester. And so it is the same, but again, Singapore is an independent country, okay? Yes, it has a big ethnic Chinese group, okay? But the official language is English. The official language for China is Chinese, okay, or Mandarin, whatever you call it. That's a huge difference. That's why, and also if you look at the survival of Singapore, it has more dependence on the well-being of Malaysia, of Indonesia, because over the last 20 years, Hong Kong government, because we know Chinese government know that the Hong Kong government and the Singaporean government are struggling to win the title of the financial hub, the financial center of Asia, right? And so all the policy that the Chinese, all the goodies, all the candies have been handed out to the Hong Kong. And so Singapore, in essence, even though there's more remote culturally, even going forward from China, it has its own unique culture, unique entity, unique independence. Unlike Hong Kong, I mean, if you don't accept you are Chinese, I don't think you can do well in Hong Kong going forward.
Dr. Lam, that was, I was just going to ask really quick, what do you see as the best scenario for Hong Kong in the next 5 to 10 years? And what is the worst scenario in the next 5 to 10 years for Hong Kong?
That's a great question. Oh my God, do I have 2 hours to answer that? Okay. Okay. Now let's talk about the best scenario. The best scenario is that under the national security law, I think it basically will act as a tranquilizer to the current chaos, okay? And put people focused back on the economics and the recovery of the COVID-19. Hong Kong has been doing very well, not as well as China, because the Hong Kong citizens, just like you and I, refuse to have those 健康码, okay, 健康碼, those health code that you wear and show that where you are. But that the best scenario is that right now, because of the US-China trade conflicts, China is relying more for Hong Kong financial system to do a lot of things. Number one is for a lot of listing of a lot of financing activities. Instead of being done in the US or anywhere, it will be done in Hong Kong. So you'll see a lot of listings. So that will be on the financial side. I think, you know, once the COVID-19 is opening, I think China will allow the citizens to visit Hong Kong and boost up the consumption over there. And also on the good side is that China is working on a national digital currency. You know, why I have to mention that? Because very quickly, you know, US dollar is such a dominant currency. So right now, 2% of the reserve is in renminbi globally, 70% is in US dollars. So in order to counter the bullishness of the US, they have to create their own money supply that they can print money too. Unlike the Fed. Fed can officially print money. We are the only country in the world that can print money, okay, without restraint. Any other country, they have to have some kind of restraint. So what China is doing right now is creating a national digital currency so that they can increase the money supply and decrease the money supply through the digital currency. Now, this is the Bitcoin type of technology, okay? But not Bitcoin. Bitcoin will never happen, you know, in a big scale because it's not controlled by the central bank or the government. So China is doing that for Hong Kong, and if it's going to be work, you know, Hong Kong, not only that will be the offshore renminbi center, will be also the digital currency, digital renminbi center of the world. Now, that means that from now on, you know, there will be more bilateral trade between China and India, between China and Japan, between China and US, all bilateral in sort of a global trade hub. Then, you know, the digital currency will become a very important, so that, you know, we'll basically reduce the reliance, the Chinese reliance on the US dollars. So basically, when you look at the good side, if the Hong Kong, especially younger generation, they have to accept the fact that, unfortunately, they're asking too much, because unlike in the US, we can ask for democracy all day long, even though our democracy is full of, again, full of hopes. But I mean, if your parents do not have money, you keep on kicking your parents' butt for ask for more money. What can they give you? A punch on your face. That's exactly Hong Kong. When you think about it, you are asking China for the democracy. What kind of democracy China has? Right? You believe that China is a democracy? Come on. So all these are reminding us that you have to accept the reality. There's going to be no democracy in Hong Kong, but there will be economic prosperity if you follow the parents' footsteps. So that's a good scenario. So it has to be some kind of mindset change. Accept the fact that, the Chinese parents are really taking care of us instead of killing us every day with the national security law. A big mindset change. Now that's the good side. What is the bad side or the unfortunate outcoming? I would say that, basically, the Chinese government is not going to be as cooperative as before. So another news I have to break it with you is that it's very scary news. Hainan Island, Hainandao. China is building a tax-free zone, economic-free trade zone in Hainan Island. Basically, in Hainan Island, there's going to be a shopping paradise. There'll be no import tax, no sales tax, no nothing. Any company can go to Hainan and just open business. They don't even have to get pre-approval. Now you go to China, you get pre-approval, right? No, you just go. Anyone can go. So Hainan, they are using Hainan to replace Hong Kong. Okay? Now, they're going to be very aggressive on that. So Hainan will be a direct threat of Hong Kong. So it depending on the China, central government, whether they want to put more resources for the revival of the Hong Kong economy. So tourism, they can control the inflow and outflow of tourism. How aggressive they want to transform the Hong Kong as a financial center, as a digital national currency center. That's all this have tied to, their thinking. So that is, without the central support from China, Hong Kong basically cannot survive for too long. That is, so it sounds like, I put too much importance of China. Now, trust me, I love Chinese. I'm not a big fan of the communist government either, okay? But you have to understand what is reality. Reality is beyond your like, your love, your preference. You just have to do what you have to do. So I think, if Hong Kong, especially younger generation, are getting more pragmatic about what can be done, what can be delivered. If you're asking for more economic resources from China, they will deliver. If you're asking for more political influence, more democracy from China, you will get another slap in the face. And they will use the national security law to continue to tighten to the point that, Hong Kong will become a third-tier city, not even a second tier, not even like Hangzhou or Suzhou, which is, I call it a second tier. Okay, it will be even a third-tier city in 10 years.
Thank you for your question, Jesse. Mr. Nash, James Nash, you have a question?
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for your time today. The discussion goes around the US, China, and in the international area, we talk about New York, London, then Hong Kong as centers for money. You mentioned Hainan, but Shanghai has a stock market capitalization that rivals Hong Kong. There is no conversation about Shanghai. And you mentioned that you talked to the mayor. there any conversation about the stock market capitalization of Shanghai that rivals Hong Kong as we speak?
Very good questions. Very good questions. I'm not trying to undermine the importance of Shanghai. What I'm suggesting is that the China government right now, they are using Shanghai as a more domestic capital, domestic economic capital for China. And so they need still a place, maybe Hong Kong or down the road Hainan, to be the offshore financing center for China. So basically, they still need a window, okay, that is essentially a little bit free from the Chinese law, the current Chinese law, economic limitations, to do a lot of trades and innovations that is beyond what the current financial system that will allow them to do. So again, I am not saying that the Chinese government is not supporting the development, continual development of Shanghai, but Shanghai is just too close for comfort. It's too close to Beijing, okay? It has a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of establishments already. So in order for China to do anything, new experiment, it has to be away, you know, from the center of influence, which is Beijing and Shanghai and that hub. So I hope I answered your questions. Again, Shanghai is still very important. Okay?
Could you predict what's going to happen to Shanghai within 10 years with its capitalization?
Well, I will look at it is that the Shanghai market will definitely rivaling, you know, probably will be the second largest active market, you know, after New York Stock Exchange in 10 years. There's no question about that.
That's the point. That's the point.
Exactly. And also because, again, think about going back to the reason why the Shanghai market is so active is also about a year or 6 months ago, they call it the Shanghai and Hong Kong link.
Yes.
So the Shanghai, you know, market can directly buy a lot of Hong Kong stock, and Hong Kong Stock Exchange, you know, Full Hong Kong Stock Exchange can buy a lot of the Shanghai listed companies.
Right.
So again, so you can see all my theme today is that Hong Kong cannot survive independently. That's the whole theme. Right. So whether you like it or not, you just accept this is the reality. So the Shanghai and Hong Kong link really help both sides, help the Hong Kong stock market, the capital activities, and also help Shanghai a lot. So you can see that Hong Kong is one of the very best market in terms of year-to-date performance.
Thank you for your question, James. I have Andrew Killer next, then
yes,
Rob,
I do have
then Fong, and then we have more questions on the chat. Quite a few questions. Andrew?
Okay. My question is this: the digital currency sounds very much like an attempt to create a reserve currency on a smaller scale. And I guess the intent is, like you were saying, is to have the ability to inflate the money. But that means that the investor is going to have a choice between American inflation or Chinese inflation. And so you will end up some kind of competition, I would imagine, as to which is the better currency to deal with. Just curious what you think.
Well, let us just put it this way. In about 7 years, it's not the total economic size, 7 to 10 years. Forget about per capita, but total economy, US and China will be identical, okay? But in terms of the global reserve, you know, China will be lucky to have more than 5% as a global currency reserve, you know, 7 years from today. Right now it's 2%, only 2%. But it has a dramatic increase already compared to 5 years ago. It's only 1% of the foreign exchange reserve currency among the World Central Bank is in renminbi. Okay, so with that, I think the question is also a challenge. That is my biggest worry. You know, now that you talk to me about this, is about my worry, the long-term worry about the U.S. economy. And that is related to your questions. Because right now we are printing money, and in God we trust. You look at the bill. In God we trust. So you trust us, we print your money, okay? And you have no choice because 70% of the global trade are settled in US dollar. But at some point, people may not, when people doubt the integrity of the financial system of the US, the integrity of the democracy of the US, then we will be in big trouble. Because right now, a lot of our current development, I'm not saying that is built on sands and whatever. There's a lot of pop up by the Fed, by a good central bank. They're doing their job brilliantly. But at some point, the debt cannot go on forever. And so that's why, the Chinese is taking advantage of this trade war to kind of test it out, whether they can have their own currency, which is more digital. And what prompted them to do that is that actually the digital currency has been very successful in China for the Chinese citizen use already. And you say, wait a minute, I didn't see any digital currency. Yes, if you go to China, okay, no, I mean, you have the cash, you don't know how to use it now, except in a hotel, because everybody has a phone and it's Alipay, it's WeChat Pay. So that is the reason Jack Ma has been asked to resign, because he became the biggest financier of China. Okay, and another Mr. Ma, the CEO of Tencent, is asked to relinquish his responsibilities, because these two, WeChat Pay and Alipay, becomes the biggest bank in China, and there's not government owned, quote unquote. So that's why China is learning from the Alipay and from the WeChat Pay that they can do a lot. And also, if you are a Chinese leader, you know that the survival of China is only one way. Reduce trade, reliance on the US, create your own domestic consumption, okay? It has been increased from 50% 5 years ago to 55%. So 55% of the US economy, the Chinese economy is in domestic consumption now. Okay, unlike the US, US is more than 70-something% is on the consumption, domestic consumption. So that's our economy. So the way I am looking at all this is that China already is way ahead of us in terms of a digital currency. Think about how often you use Apple Pay. Just an example. So sometimes when you are the underdogs, you really become ahead. I think in the telecommunication, China was the underdog, and then China were underdog, and then they decided not to build the landlines and go directly to cell towers. Now the 5G and everything. So why the Alipay and WeChat was more successful than Apple Pay is like billion times more successful than Apple Pay? There's a reason for it. Because they don't have a credit card. They don't have a personal credit system. Because a lot of businessmen, they somehow, they get their tax very murky and nobody, and there's a bit too big of a cash economy going on in China. Okay? So right now, the digital currency by WeChat and Alipay has been in place already. So right now, the creation of digital currency is more for the foreign. So I hope I answered this question in a way that, so it's a logical development. It's not all of a sudden, oh, it's a great idea, let's have a digital currency. No, they have been using digital currency for the last few years, very successful already through WeChat and Alipay.
Thank you, Andrew. Russ, you're next.
Thank you, Evan. So you mentioned a couple things I'm interested in. You mentioned that Hong Kong, their prosperity will improve, but you also contrasted that with Hainan Island also being supported. So what's the timeline for both of those things happening? Do you see Hong Kong slipping and then Hainan Island rising as far as being prosperous? And what's the timeline for it?
I would say that, you know, in order to build the Hainan Island, even the Chinese speed, you know, it will be 7 to 10 years to make it to be a rival to Hong Kong. So that's why, you know, Hong Kong still have the next, you know, 7 to 10 years to really, quote unquote, I use the word, to make up with the parents, okay? Again, you know, I sound so pro-communist today, but that's the reality. Hong Kong really needs Chinese support, especially right now. If you look at the global trade after the pandemics, okay, Hong Kong is even more rely on the Chinese consumptions. You know, it was crazy, you know, when the Chinese, you know, tourists come from the different provinces and go to Hong Kong, and they just buy up everything, you know, and the LV and everything. And that's why Hong Kong retail has been so successful. But the Hong Kong retail, you know, even before the pandemics, okay, because of the protests and the social instability, the Hong Kong retail has been down 20% before the COVID-19 already, okay? And where those come from? Chinese consumer, they're not coming. Chinese tourists, they're not coming. And so that's the reality. So I think that Hong Kong still have some time to catch up. The best Hong Kong can hope for in 10 years is to be able to stand as a first line city, as same as Shenzhen, as Shanghai, as Beijing. That's the best Hong Kong can hope for, okay? And I don't think Hong Kong can maintain its very unique positions like you know, the last 20 years. I mean, that was gone already.
Thank you.
Thank you, Russ. Next, Fong, please.
Yes, first of all, thank you, Dr. Lam, for speaking with us. My question to you is that you said about 7 or 8 years for Hong Kong to recover, and most of the economy has been moving to Hainan Dao. And I know for a fact that a lot of Hong Kong money has been moved to Singapore, because Hong Kong used to be a financial hub in banking. And I'd like to know what's the banking situation right now, you know, relatively to Singapore, and how is it going to catch up with another financial hub like Singapore to Hainan Dao, or, you know, if later more catching up will be done in Shanghai?
Okay, so again, it's another great question. I think the immediate impact through the national security law imposed in Hong Kong is that basically all the US bank cannot function, okay? If you look at it, even HSBC, you know, has been put on the alert. So that is very challenging right now. So the outflow, that's why another reason I am very cautious about the Hong Kong outlook is that all the money has been leaving already, okay? So, and they are maybe to Singapore, to everywhere, to Taiwan, you know, and of course, you know, Lee Ka-shing being a Superman, he has already bought a great piece of land in a Canary Wharf in London. They're going to build exactly like a Hong Kong center, essentially, residential, commercial. So make it a mini Hong Kong over there, because, you know, if it all come true that 2 million Hong Kong people can literally go to UK and spend money. Of course, you know, if they can find a job, that's fine. But how many of them can really literally find a job, right? But 2 million under the BNO passport. So a lot of money will be leaving Hong Kong. So that's why, you know, China has to prepare for the worst as well. Because, you know, China, what if? So they also look at the magnitude. Because, you know, the faster the decay of Hong Kong, the faster they will pump up the development of Hainan. Okay? In Chinese, 我们叫两手进车. Okay? Two hands, one hand and another hand. So it's the economics. That's why they always like one hand economists. Just tell me your opinion instead of two hands. But they have two hands. So the development of Hainan has a lot to do with the progress made in Hong Kong. Again, contrary to a lot of Western media, they always think that, you know, whatever China want to do, want to make the debt, want to really, you know, punish Hong Kong and basically for his misbehavior and trying to distance its support from Hong Kong. It's not true. I think China is still very much have its eyes on Hong Kong, but they now learn that they have a lost generation. People, the young generation were born in the 90s. They have no idea what the Chinese government has done to Hong Kong in terms of SARS, the tourists, you know, the financial crisis and all this. They have no idea. So this is a lost generation, okay? For them to believe in their parents. Not that the parents are perfect. No parents are perfect, okay? But in order to believe, you know, Taiwanese don't have to believe in China, in communist China. Singaporeans do not have to believe in China. You Hong Kongese better believe in China. You have no other choice.
Thank you, Fong.
Well,
Bill,
thank you.
Aaron and I are perfect. Aaron and I are perfect.
Yeah, let me go to Bill, and then John, can I get you next after that, Maurice? Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Lam, we so much appreciate your time and your insights. I'm hoping you might have an insight with the aggressiveness of the communists in China, what the long and short term sense of Taiwan may be. Should we be worried?
I don't think we should worry about Taiwan, at least for the next 10 years. But I do believe that, you know, in my lifetime, there will be a unified China, and the unification is done by military. So right now, again, you look at the, because US need Taiwan as a buffer, okay? I mean, Taiwan has always been, you know, played, quote unquote, by the US, okay? And so if you look at it, right now, we just look at how many aircrafts, you know, those super aircrafts we have 11 of them, okay? And together, you know, if we ship it all to the Taiwan and the South China Sea, there will be 800 military planes, you know, the F-16 and F-28 of the world that will be in that neighborhood. That itself will be the best protection for Taiwan. And because US want to make it happen. But as going forward, you know, now that, you know, China have all these, you know, super, you know, aircraft carriers, now the third one is coming. And so that advantage over the US over China in terms of military advantage will be gone in the next 7 to 10 years. Then Taiwan will be in danger. And also, so I really believe that, you know, the only way for unification is not a peaceful one. It's going to be by military. How soon? It depends on the military strength between the US and China. And also whether, you know, the US, the Chinese can see any type of more economic benefits between the US and China trade. They kind of go hand in hand, because at the end of the day, you know, we all know that if China now, you know, have a military attack on Taiwan, and then we basically get into war with the US, and basically, you know, Chinese economy will collapse as well. So why are they doing that? To help themselves? No, they would not. So at some point when they have enough reserve and resources and buffer for that, they will do it. But I don't see it in the near future.
Thank you, Bill. John Donovan, you have a question? You can unmute yourself.
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I have something inadvertently.
Okay. Okay, Maurice?
Oh, sure. Thanks, Dr. Lam. It was very interesting. Just on the perfect parent thing, Aaron and I are perfect parents. I think Greg are too. So
I'm not sure that'll apply to us. But I have a quick question. So, you know, every generation feels about the upcoming generation that they don't have some of the traditions or thoughts that they did when we were growing up. I can say that easily about my daughter, and I can say that easily about many of my friends feel like our kids don't have what we have. So how much do you attribute some of what's going on in China to just kind of the natural forces of youth having different ideas? You know, I love my daughters, but I don't know that they're as into history as I was. I didn't get into history until to a little bit later in life, and so I had more interest, and so I'm more involved in what the world is doing or how the country is going. So how much of that do you think is would you attribute to that just the natural forces of youth saying, oh, that was that generation and this is this generation?
Well, very good questions. Very good questions. Henry Dent, a very, very famous writer, basically predict, you know, the bull market, basically use the populations and the demographics to predict. And in his in a few books, you know, that he wrote many years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, the great boom ahead, he basically touched on your point. He said that, you know, each generation will be completely different from the other generation. If you look at in the 60s, you know, because, you know, after the war and then we are in a recovery. So all the CEOs, they are basically JDs, you know, lawyers in the 60s. You look at all the, you know, lawyers, okay? And then become the Vietnam Wars, you know, become the hippies, okay? And so the next generations are more the creative type and the lose-lose type. And then you go back, you know, to an era which is all the MBAs of the world, you know, very structured, you know, then dominate the world. And now you are seeing in the US, you know, we are seeing more people like this, the Zuckerberg of the world, right? I mean, there's completely different from the last generation, very creative, everything. But the Hong Kong generation is not like that. It's completely different than the US. What you're saying is very, very true in the US, but not necessarily true in rebellious is always within young men's and young ladies' middle name, okay? That's not the point. The point is that they have too much of an ideal of democracy. For example, you and I, we know the shortfall of democracy. Come on, right? We know why you can win a popular vote and still, you know, lose the presidents. Maybe it will happen again this time, right? So we all know the shortfall. Again, I stay away from politics, but you all know the shortfall of democracy. For the Hong Kong, the new generation, they have too much of a fancy of a democracy. They think that democracy can solve the housing problem. They think that democracy can solve every problem. That is the difference. You ask your kids, they have no fantasy about the shortfalls of the US democracy system, but we love it. If you ask me, where would you like to live? In China or in the US? Hey, I'm gonna be here for the next 20, 30 years, right? I know all kind of shittiness in California, how much tax I have to pay, everything. But I know what I mean. But the Hong Kong, I think the new generation, first, they don't have the cultural identity, which is really bad. Second, sometimes they're very lost. And they have identity crisis. And then they have an economic crisis, seriously, because if you look at it, why, you know, in the world right now, artificial intelligence, why Chinese is revenging on the TikTok sales? Because China is really better in artificial intelligence than the US. This is a Chinese strong point, artificial intelligence. How many universities in Hong Kong, I mean in China, and how many engineers they produce? So essentially, I go to university, I talk to 200 students every year, okay? And so from 115 countries in the world, from your Rochester alone. And what I find out is that the newer generation, on average, the Chinese student in the 18 to 22 years old have a much better global view of the world, much more sophisticated than the general Hong Kong students. That's the problem. And the students, Hong Kong students, still have that kind of fantasy. Democracy will help us to solve everything. And so they're backing on the Chinese government. They say, you have to give us democracy, thinking that once I have democracy, and then everything will be gone. So that's a huge difference, huge difference.
Thank you, Maurice.
Thank you so much.
We have time for a few more questions. Stephanie Johnson?
Well, I'm that popular, huh? I think it's only 10 minutes Q&A.
Yes. Stephanie? Stephanie, we can't hear you. Are you on mute? Nope. Do you have a mic on mute? I see you're off of mute, but we can't hear you for some reason. If you want to type in your question, I can ask them. Okay, do we have another question? Any more questions? Let me look on page 2 here. Any more questions for Dr. Lambs? Stephanie, do you want me to wait or you want, okay. Okay, sorry, we can't hear you. Dr. Lambs, thank you so much for coming today and providing a very engaging topic of discussion. Everyone, please give Dr. Lambs a round of applause.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
And
Dr.
Lambs. Dr. Gay Yun. Dr. Gay Yun extended invitation, knowing very well that I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and both were sourced by Linda, so thank you, Linda, so much. Okay, thank you again, Dr. Lambs. We will be donating a book on your behalf to our Kroll Public Library, so thank you. Next week, our program, our guest speaker will be Michael Campbell, treating area patients with the coronavirus. Rotarians and guests, thank you so much for joining us to today's meeting. Thank you to Joe Kwan for coming today, Dr. Yuen, Jason Kurtenbach, and Dr. Michael Lin. Please come back and visit us next week. Folks, the September 3rd, 2020 meeting of the Rotary Club of San Marino is adjourned. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Aaron. Great meeting.
Thank you, Maurice.
Thank you.
Great
Thank you,
everyone.
Happy anniversary, Gilda.
Good meeting.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Aaron, you're doing a great job.
Oh, I hope so. I
Great
hope so.
job, Gil.
Thank you.
Gil,
Thank you. I'm glad that there was plenty of questions that kind of helped to lengthen our meeting. So yeah.
Great meeting. Great meeting.
It was great.
Yeah, that was nice.
Thank you.
Very good meeting.
Thank you.
President Gil, you rock.
Oh, stop.
Amen.
We're big fans. Big fans.
Okay, thank you.
All right, guys. Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye, Mike. Bye. Have a good weekend. Have a nice
Bye-bye.
holiday. Nice holiday, all.
Holiday. Be safe. Stay safe. Be safe. Be well.